The wife grabbed her in-laws' things and started tossing them into the hallway. No one was planning to leave otherwise. Nicole's hand shook as she grabbed Frank's fishing tackle box from their living room, the weight of it nothing compared to the fury that had been building for 6 months. The temporary stay that began when her in-laws lost their apartment had morphed into a permanent occupation of her Austin home, complete with Carol rearranging Nicole's kitchen and Frank claiming the garage as his workshop. The wife grabbed her in-laws' things and started tossing them into the hallway. No one was planning to leave otherwise. Ryan had promised weekly that he'd talk to his parents about finding their own place, but every conversation ended with Frank's health concerns or Carol's tears about feeling unwanted. Meanwhile, Nicole had become a stranger in her own house, tiptoeing around people who treated her home like their personal retirement resort. The breaking point had come that morning when Nicole discovered Carol had thrown away her expensive skincare products, claiming they were cluttering the bathroom counter. 6 months of accumulated resentment exploded as Nicole realized her mother-in-law was systematically erasing her presence from her own home. Frank's vintage record collection crashed into the hallway wall as Nicole hurled it from their spare bedroom, which had somehow become his permanent music den. The sound brought Carol running from the kitchen, her face shifting from confusion to outrage as she witnessed Nicole's methodical demolition of their comfortable arrangement. Ryan's attempts to intervene came too late and with too little authority. His parents had trained him to prioritize their comfort over his wife's sanity, creating a household where Nicole's needs ranked last in every decision. His suggestion that they talk this through like adults fell flat when Nicole reminded him that adults didn't need 6 months to find their own housing. Carol's protests about having nowhere to go rang hollow when Nicole produced evidence of the apartment deposits Frank and Carol had refused to pay, choosing instead to live rent-free while their son covered their expenses and their daughter-in-law provided free housekeeping services. The physical act of removing Frank and Carol's belongings felt liberating in a way Nicole hadn't anticipated, each thrown item representing a reclaimed piece of her personal space and autonomy. Their clothes, toiletries, and accumulated junk flew into the hallway with therapeutic precision, creating a mountain of evidence that their stay had expanded far beyond temporary convenience. Ryan's horror at his wife's actions revealed how completely he'd accepted his parents' occupation as normal, treating Nicole's explosion as unreasonable rather than inevitable. His immediate concern for his parents' feelings over his wife's desperation showed Nicole exactly where his loyalties lay after 6 months of subtle manipulation and boundary violations. Frank's attempt to assert authority by demanding Nicole stop throwing tantrums backfired spectacularly when she responded by hurling his collection of golf magazines directly at his feet. The gesture was both symbolic and satisfying, representing her refusal to be lectured by someone who'd been freeloading in her home while criticizing her housekeeping standards. Carol's theatrical sobbing about family loyalty and respect fell on deaf ears as Nicole continued her systematic eviction, each item she removed accompanied by a calm recitation of boundary violations and broken promises. The list was longer than anyone expected, revealing how thoroughly Frank and Carol had colonized every aspect of Nicole and Ryan's daily life. The neighbors' curious faces appeared in windows as the hallway filled with personal belongings, transforming Nicole's private frustration into a public declaration that she would no longer tolerate being treated like a hotel employee in her own home. The embarrassment was intentional and necessary, forcing Frank and Carol to confront the reality of their situation. Ryan's final attempt to negotiate a compromise was met with Nicole's ultimatum. His parents had exactly 1 hour to collect their belongings and leave, or she would call the police to report trespassers. The threat was delivered with such calm certainty that even Frank stopped arguing about his rights as family. Frank and Carol's departure was swift and filled with muttered threats about never forgiving this humiliation, but Nicole felt only relief as she watched their overpacked car disappear down her street. The house felt immediately larger, quieter, and more like home than it had in months, despite the relationship carnage scattered in their wake. Ryan's attempts to guilt Nicole about her methods were met with a detailed accounting of every compromise she'd made, every boundary she'd allowed to be crossed, and every conversation where he'd promised action that never materialized. The mathematical precision of her grievances left little room for him to claim her actions were disproportionate to their offense. The revelation that Frank and Carol had been actively discouraging Ryan from asking them to leave, using emotional manipulation and health scares to extend their stay indefinitely, crystallized Nicole's understanding of their true character. They hadn't been unfortunate victims of circumstance but calculating opportunists who'd found a comfortable arrangement worth protecting through lies and manipulation. Ryan's choice to follow his parents to their hastily arranged hotel room rather than support his wife's boundary setting sent a clear message about his priorities that Nicole received with surprising calm. She'd spent 6 months hoping he would choose their marriage over his parents' comfort, and his decision to leave with them provided the clarity she'd been seeking. 2 weeks later, Nicole was living alone in a house that finally felt like hers again, with Ryan calling sporadically to suggest family therapy and reconciliation attempts that ignored the fundamental issue of his inability to set boundaries with his parents. The separation gave her space to recognize how much of herself she'd sacrificed trying to accommodate people who had no intention of reciprocating her consideration. 6 months later, Nicole's divorce was finalized with minimal drama, as Ryan had chosen to maintain his parents' approval over fighting for his marriage. Frank and Carol had successfully reclaimed their son but lost access to the comfortable arrangement they'd tried to make permanent through manipulation and emotional blackmail. Sometimes the most loving thing you could do was refuse to enable other people's selfishness, even when that meant accepting the end of relationships built on your willingness to sacrifice your own needs for their comfort.